Schedules of reinforcement. If you have been reading this section on basic principles carefully, you may have begun to wonder whether the use of operant conditioning principles, particularly positive reinforcement, requires you as the teacher to be present every time a desired response happens. If so, you might have some justifiable reservations about the practicality of this theory. The answer is yes, up to a point, but after that, no. As we have pointed out, when you are trying to get a new behavior established, especially if it is a complex behavior that requires shaping, learning proceeds best when every desired response is positively reinforced and every undesired response is ignored. This is known as a continuous reinforcement schedule. Once the behavior has been learned, however, positive reinforcement can be employed on a non-continuous or intermittent basis to perpetuate that behavior. There are four basic intermittent reinforcement schedules: fixed interval, FI, variable interval, VI, fixed ratio, FR, and variable ratio, RV, or VR. Each schedule produces a different pattern of behavior. Fixed interval schedule. In this schedule, a learner is reinforced for the first desired response that occurs after a predetermined amount of time has elapsed. For example, 5 minutes, 1 hour, or 7 days. Once the response has occurred and been reinforced, the next interval begins. Any desired behaviors that are made during an interval are ignored. The reinforced behavior occurs at a time the reinforced behavior occurs at a lower level during the early part of the interval and gradually rises as the time for reinforcement draws closer. Once the reinforcer is delivered, the frequency of the relevant behavior declines, but then gradually rises toward the end of the next interval. Fixed interval, FI schedules of reinforcement occur in education when teachers schedule exams or projects at regular intervals. The grade or score is considered to be a reinforcer. As you are certainly aware, it is not unusual to see little studying or progress occur during the early part of the interval. However, several days before an exam or due date, the pace quickens considerably. Variable interval schedule. If you would like to see a more consistent pattern of behavior, you might consider using a variable interval schedule. With a VI schedule, the length of time between reinforcements is essentially random, but it averages out to a predetermined interval. Thus, 4 successive reinforcements may occur at the following intervals: 1 week, 4 days, 2 weeks, 5 weeks. The average interval is 3 weeks. Teachers who give surprise quizzes or call on students to answer oral questions on the average of once every third day are invoking a variable interval schedule. Fixed ratio schedule. Within this schedule, reinforcement is provided whenever a predetermined number of responses are made. A rat in a Skinner box may be reinforced with a food pellet whenever it presses a lever 50 times. A factory worker may earn $20 each time he assembles 5 electronic circuit boards. A teacher may reinforce a student with praise for every 10 arithmetic problems correctly completed. Fixed ratio schedules tend to produce high response rates because the faster the learner responds, the sooner the reinforcement is delivered. However, a relatively brief period of no or few responses occurs immediately after the reinforcer is delivered. Another example that is likely to hit closer to home is the habit that many people have of constantly checking their smartphones for messages. According to one analysis, most of the texts, voicemails, emails, tweets, etc. that we receive contain non-critical messages that can either be ignored or responded to at a later time. So why the constant checking that you see on the part of so many people? Because every once in a while we receive a message that has useful, important, and time-sensitive information. Just as the gambler feels that the next pull of the slot machine might produce a winner, we feel that the next smartphone message might be the one we need to attend to right then and there. Variable ratio schedule. Like a variable interval schedule, This schedule tends to eliminate irregularities in response rate, thereby producing a more consistent rate. This is accomplished through reinforcement after a different number of responses from one time to the next, according to a predetermined average. If you decided to use a variable ratio schedule, 15, VR15 schedule, you might reinforce a desired behavior after 12, 7, 23, and 18 occurrences, respectively. That is, after the 12th, 19th, 42nd, and 60th desired behaviors. Because the occurrence of reinforcements is so unpredictable, learners tend to respond fairly rapidly for long periods of time. If you need proof, just watch people play the slot machines in gambling casinos. Educational applications of operant conditioning principles. In the late 1940s, when Skinner's daughter was in elementary school, he observed a number of instructional weaknesses that concerned him. These included the excessive use of aversive consequences to shape behavior, students studying to avoid a low grade or embarrassment in the classroom, an overly long interval between students taking tests or handing in homework and getting corrective feedback, and poorly organized lessons and workbooks that did not lead to specific goals. Skinner became convinced that if the principles of operant conditioning were systematically applied to education, all such weaknesses could be reduced or eliminated. That belief, which he then reiterated consistently until his death in 1990, see, for example, Skinner, 1984, is based on 4 prescriptions that come straight from his laboratory research on operant conditioning. Number 1, be clear about what is to be taught. Number 2, teach first things first. Number 3, present subsequent material in small logical steps. Number 4, allow students to learn at their own rate. This straightforward formulation became the basis for 2 educational applications, an approach to teaching that we now call computer-based instruction, and a set of procedures for helping students learn appropriate classroom behaviors that are referred to as behavior modification. The next few sections will describe the nature of these applications and assess the extent to which they improve classroom learning. Before we get to these applications, however, we would like to point out something about operant conditioning principles. Although they are not as popular with psychologists and educators as they once were, we find it interesting that educators constantly manage to rediscover them. A recent essay in the Chronicle of Higher Education noted that the successful use of adult job training programs of such basic operant conditioning principles as self-pacing, logical organization of material, timely and frequent feedback, and mastery of basic skills before moving on to higher level ones was noted. I missed the verb. Oh, the verb was noted, yes. Computer-based instruction. Does computer-based technology aid learning? When desktop computers and the instructional programs that were created for them were introduced into public schools in the early 1980s, many educators and psychologists believe that students would learn significantly more through this medium than through traditional teacher-led text-based instruction. This approach to instruction has been referenced or referred to mostly as computer-based instruction, CBI, although the term technology-enhanced instruction is being used with increasing frequency. Instructional programs designed for computers generally fall into one of the categories described in Table 7.1. The research that has been done on the effectiveness of these varieties of CBI paints an interesting picture. Major types of computer-based instruction programs. I think it's computer-based instruction. Type of program, drill and practice. Practice knowledge and skills learned earlier to produce fast and accurate responses. Presents many problems, questions, and exercises. Checks answers and provides feedback. Provides cues when student is not sure of correct responses. Keeps track of errors. Adjusts difficulty level of problems and questions to the proficiency level of the student. The type of program being tutorial, teach new information, um, for example, facts, definitions, concepts, and skills. New material presented in linear or branching format. Linear programs require all students to begin with first frame and work through subsequent frames in given sequence. Incorrect responses minimized by brief answers, small steps, and frequent prompts. Branching programs allow students to respond to different sets of frames depending on correctness of responses. For incorrect responses, program provides supplementary material that attempts to reteach. Dialogue programs mimic teacher-student interactions by presenting material, evaluating responses, and adjusting subsequent instruction by presenting either more difficult or easier material. Type of program being problem-solving programs, simulations, and games. Teach new information and skills and provide an opportunity to apply what was learned in a meaningful context that would otherwise be unavailable because of cost, physical danger, and time constraints. A student uses newly learned and existing information to solve a realistic problem. Settings may be realistic, in other words, piloting a plane, historical, adventure, in other words, guiding a wagon trail or wagon train across the Oregon Trail, or imaginary, in other words, colonizing a new world. Students practice creating and testing hypotheses on effects of different variables on achieving a goal.